Okay. Hey, everybody. It's time for the patch 10.8 rundown. This is where we go over the changes that are currently on PBE that should be coming out. As always, the note here is this is not necessarily final. If we see anything over the weekend that causes us to change, there is still room for the patch to change, and we could still pivot. Before we dive into this, let's talk about first how 10.7 has landed and what the goals of 10.8 are. So 10.7 overall has landed in a pretty good balance state. There's one comp that's a little too powerful, which is Mech Infiltrator, and there are a few comps that are a little underpowered. But overall, we think this landed in a really good balance state. We saw a lot of comps win. We even saw what we figured could happen eventually, which is the emergence of a new comp. People were like, hey, the meta's solved, and then fast forward, a new comp came out. Which is always healthy to see. Shows that people haven't quite solved the game. So it's good. But what we're seeing with 10.7 is there are some systemic problems that are going to need addressing. Some of them can be solved in the short term. Some can be solved in the longer term. We'll have to keep working on them. But overall, looking in a good spot. So for 10.8, our goal here was to add another legendary unit, something we'd wanted to have since launch, as well as make some adjustments to some underused items and some underused traits, and bring down a few of the overperformers. So, let's jump into it. First thing is, new champion, Xerath. He is a Darkstar Sorcerer. Kind of low HP, so he's a bit fragile. Low armor, so he's definitely a backline Sorcerer. Attack damage, nothing to write home about. Basic damage. Really good attack speed, 0.9. And then the mana is 30 out of 80, so he needs 5 auto attacks or a few tier items to get started. Once he starts, the way it works is he starts channeling. During this, his auto attacks are replaced with meteors. He shoots off meteors. So he does scale with auto attack speed. Giving him something like Ginsu's is really good. And each meteor shoots a random foe. Now it says random, but I want to explain this a little bit. It chooses a random target, but then tries to spread out. So, like, it'll never choose the same target again. It tries to hit every individual team member. So you're not going to get your, like, important thing hit. So he does this for 6, 8, 45 seconds. The meteors do a good chunk of damage. And if the meteor kills, it actually does a shock that stuns everyone nearby for some smaller damage. So really good against grouped up enemies also. So he's the new champion, works really well in Darkstar, works really well in Sorcerer, and interestingly enough, I actually won a game with him yesterday where we did Chrono, and it worked well. So, like, he didn't even need either of his traits. He's just a strong champion. Cool. 2 new Galaxies. As we mentioned, we're going to be doing Galaxies every patch. So there's 2 new ones this time. The first of which is pretty interesting. Every turn, you get a free reroll. You cannot save them up, so you need to spend it every turn. But you get 1 free reroll. So if you like pressing the reroll button, this is the Galaxy for you. We also see this Galaxy is pretty inflationary. You start to see a lot of 3 stars you might not normally see. Some 1-cost 3 stars even. It's been pretty fun so far. And then the second one is called the Super Dense Galaxy. Upon reaching level 5, you get a Force of Nature. So pretty interesting. Definitely, what's really cool is when you get the Super Dense Galaxy with the guaranteed Force of Nature, and then you get a Carousel that has all Force of Natures. Can get pretty exciting. So, 2 new Galaxies. Should be fun. Okay, system changes. There's pretty much 4 big system changes here we got to talk about. The first one is streaks. Streaks have been a good thing for the game. We are happy that people are finally, like, really paying attention to streaks, and they're really like, hey, I need to win streak, I need to loss streak. That's a good thing. We want that. But it inflated a bit too much gold into the economy. So what we've decided to do is pull it back just 1 notch. So before it used to be 2, 3, 4. Now it's 2, 3, 4, 5. You have to hit 5 before you start getting the big gold. This should lower the amount of gold that streaking gives you just a bit, but still at the same time, you still want a streak. So it's a slight reduction there. Next up, let's talk about player damage. This is a big one. When we launched, we had this goal that no one be dead before Raptors, and that games go on a little longer, so that you get more end game. And we hit that goal, but we did so in a kind of perverse way, in the sense that like early game didn't matter, right? Like you could literally open fort for all of stage 2 and stage 3 and be at like 70 health. Didn't really matter. So we're making some changes to how player damage works to try to combat that. If you've been watching me on PvE, you can see how those works. But the general idea here is we're going to shift the damage from the base into the units so that it matters more how much you won or lost by. And that late game you won't just like guaranteed take 20 damage even if you barely lost. So what you can see here is the player damage went down pretty dramatically. At stage 2, it went from 3 to 0, 4 to 1, 5 to 2, 10 to 5, 15 to 10, and 20 to 15. So definitely went down, which means you're taking less damage from the base. But the unit damage went up. So it went from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 3 to 6, 4 to 8. Now after the 5th one, it stops being double. So it's like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And so what this does is, again, if you win by a lot, you'll do a lot of player damage. If you barely win, you won't do as much now. So this should make early game performance matter a bit more. You can actually be aggressive and do more player damage. People die before Raptors now. So last thing is special carousels. Definitely took all the feedback on the carousels. And we've made some pretty significant changes. I don't have all the details written out here, but the general idea is the special ones happen less, and we moved some around so some of the painful ones don't happen later. So, for example, the ones that are all a single item are usually earlier. The ones that are more variety of items are later. We've also added some new ones. You can kind of see it here, but for example, the opening carousel, I call it the underused items carousel. Where it's a full item and it's a bunch of the underused ones. So a couple new formations have been added. Should be some more fun, but generally you should see the normal carousel more often. Okay, trait reworks. There are two things to talk about here. The first is Mech Pilot. Mech Pilot is getting kind of a rework in how the HP is calculated. So beforehand, it was literally just the sum of the pilot's HP. That's it. Plain and simple. But what that did is it made it so when you 3-starred Annie and you 3-starred Rumble, basically it was a giant like spike, like really big spike. So what we've done is we've changed it to 1800 plus 50% of the pilot's HP. And what that does is you can see down here, I made a table for you to see. Go away. Oh my god. Why does it do that? Anyway, table down here where you can see that what happened is like the level 3 mech, the level 4 mech, the level 5 mech actually kind of got buffed. They got more HP, so they kind of got buffed. But when you start hitting that level 6, 7, 8, 9, it gets nerfed. And so like the level 7 mech, for example, lost 500 HP. The level 8 mech lost almost 1100 HP. So this means when you start hitting those 3 stars, it won't be quite as big a spike. So it'll still be good. The other thing we did is we lowered the damage at level 7 and 8 on the spell. So it went from 900 to 800 at level 7 and 1500 to 1200 at level 8. So it should not be quite as big and quite as tanky. Now, level 9 is still 5,000. If you hit the level 9 mech, congratulations, you win. Yay. The other big change for traits is we've added chase traits. The rule for chase traits is if you can do it with 2 spatulas, it's worth adding. So what we've added is Blade Master, Darkstar, Infiltrator, Protector, Rebel, and Sorcerer chase traits. These are the prismatic ones. These are the hard-to-get ones that should be quite good. Now, these are balanced around how difficult they are to do. For example, 9 Blade Master requires level 9 and 2 spatulas. That's really hard, so it gets to be powerful. 9 Darkstar requires level 9, 2 spatulas, and a legendary. It gets to be quite powerful. Sorcerer requires nothing. It doesn't even require, requires a legendary, but it doesn't even require level 9, doesn't require any spatula, so it's not that big a bump. So we've added these. Should be fun to chase after. I know when I hit my 9 Darkstar game, it was fun. I watched a video of, I think it was Bunny Fufu hitting 9 Blade Master, and he had fun. So it should be exciting. Chase after these. Make your fun content. Now, we did not add 4 Demolitionist. That is on purpose. Right now, we're not really excited about adding 4 Demolitionists. We could reconsider later, but yeah. Cool. So that's chase traits. Other trait changes. Celestial. Celestial 2 continues to be a really cool thing to like swap in, get some extra healing. But Celestial 4 and 6 have not been worth it as much. So we're buffing Celestial 4 and 6. Celestial 4 goes from 30 to 40. Celestial 6 goes from 60 to 75. Will this make 6 Celestial comps meta? Probably not. Who knows? Maybe someone will figure out something really cool with like 6 Celestial Aurelion Soul or something. But we don't expect this to like massively change the meta. But if you do pull it off, it should be a little bit more worth. Cybernetic. If you look at the data, Cybernetic is consistently the best performing comp in the game. It has an incredibly strong early game, which you then snowball, you hit the late game, and you do really well. And as long as you have really good items on your Aurelia or your Echo, you probably win. It's a very strong comp. It's not like the SS tier, but it's really good. So we are pulling down the 6-piece just a bit. 50 HP, 5 AD. This nerf combined with the fact that Xerath exists, which makes Echo harder to get, we think will be enough to nerf Cybernetic to a healthy spot. Mercenary. This isn't a buff or a nerf, but now there is a visualization underneath the mercenaries, which will show you how many upgrades they have. So if you see somebody's misfortune on the board, you'll see this cool little effect around them, and it'll tell you if they have 1, 2, or 3 upgrades. So that's kind of cool to see what you're up against. Sorcerer. Sorcerer has been an interesting one. Sorcerer, we started the PvE cycle with this buff being massive. It used to be 20, 50, 100. But then what we actually found was in Korea, Sorcerer was actually very, very meta. So we pulled back on these buffs quite a bit. So now the only buff is to 4 Sorcerer. This is a small buff to 4 Sorcerer, which, yes, is also a buff to the Star Guardian E-Girl comp. But 5% shouldn't make a massive difference and is pretty healthy here. Lastly, Space Pirate. Space Pirate, we still think will be underperforming after this, but we wanted to give it a slight buff. So now if you get that 4-piece Space Pirate, there's a 20% chance to spawn items instead of 15%. That being said, we still think Space Pirate needs more. But, yeah. Okay, champ changes. Not a lot of champion changes this patch, because, again, we do think a lot of things are in a pretty healthy spot. So, Caitlyn gets a small spell damage buff to her spell. Her spell is supposed to be a big execute. So it is just that now. If you do manage to 3-star Caitlyn, which is possible, especially with the reroll Galaxy, her spell should one-shot things. So, big buff there. Xayah. Xayah has also... It's crazy, because Xayah was designed to be the early game carry. And she's been doing okay at that. Not great, believe it or not. So we have buffed her 1 and 2-star version. So again, we want her to be very strong early game. So she gets a small buff on her spell. Lastly, Zoe. If you look at the data, Zoe was actually the worst 1-cost 2-star in the game by a significant margin in the early stages. She definitely got better as time went on, because having her in your Star Guardian comp, for example, and CCing an important backline carry, really good. But early game, she needed to be a little bit more performing, so she's worth having in the comp. So what we did is we gave her a little bit of early game damage. So if you 2-star her, it'll hit just a little harder. And then if you 3-star her, the stun duration is really good. So now you might actually want to 3-star your Zoe, because a 4-second stun on their backline Jhin is definitely worth doing. So, okay. 2-cost changes. The Annie one is going to be controversial here, because we had to be careful. All 3 of the mech pilots have this problem where you don't really like running them unless they're in the mech. So we had to be really careful on how we buff them, because we need to buff them in ways that don't affect the mech, which means you can't touch their HP, you can't touch their ED, and honestly, even their spell's pretty risky. So, with Annie, because again, she's supposed to be the tank of the Sorcerer comp, she gets to be a little tankier. She gets a little more armor, and when she casts her spell, she gets to shield for a little bit more. Is this a buff to mech? Technically, yes, but we hope it shouldn't be a huge buff to mech. It should be more a buff to running Annie in your Sorcerer comp. Darius. Darius continues to be a really exciting champion with a really, really giant gaping weakness. So we're giving him another buff. Honestly, I still don't think this moves the needle that much on him. But he gets 10 mana off a spell. He gets more tries at a spell. Lucian. Lucian is very, very strong. Cybernetic. Early game, just kind of a powerhouse. So we're just pulling 5 AD out of him. So just a small nerf there. Okay, Rakan. Rakan, this is actually a bit of a remake. This is a bit of a redesign here. Rakan right now, basically his spell hits his current auto attack target, and the radius is huge. Like, he hits entire teams. So we've changed it. So instead of hitting his auto attack target, he hits the furthest enemy away within 3 hexes, which means he can actually start hitting the backline. Hitting the backline here is really powerful. It's one of the weaknesses of the Protector comp. Like, you can actually have Rakan hit Jhin. So, really strong. But the radius has been shrunk. So, he now, instead of hitting, like, an entire enemy team, will only hit, like, 3 to 5 enemies. So, a bit of a nerf there in the radius. And he gets to cast it more often. So 50 out of 100 instead of 50 out of 150. Again, overall, though, we think this has been a buff to Rakan. It has made the Protector comp better. So, lastly is Shen. This one's a bit divisive, because Shen is good early game, as he should be good early game. He's supposed to be a very tanky unit. He hasn't quite been living up to that, so he's getting a small HP buff. And if you 3-star him, which, yes, this is a Bang Bros comp buff. If you 3-star him, he gets a 5-second dodge instead of a 4-second dodge. So, Shen should be an early good, champ you want it. So, go for it. All right, 3 costs. Not a lot of changes here. The first one, I'm sure many players will be happy to see this. But Shaco is getting a bit of a nerf and redesign a little bit as well. His AD is going down 5, so that's a kind of a big hit to Shaco there. But the other thing is, what we're doing is we're shifting his power a bit. So actually at 1 star, it's a bit of a buff. 2 star, it's neutral, and 3 star, it's nerfed. So he'll still be good. He'll still be doing damage. He'll just be doing less damage. And again, 3 star won't quite be the win condition that it was before. So, should be good. You saw me use it earlier. It's still good, but again, Shaco is definitely one of those champions that has exhibited strong emotions from players. A lot of players don't like fighting Shaco. Syndra buffs. Yes, people are like, oh my god, Syndra buffs. But let's talk about these Syndra buffs. The first one is literally a quality of life change. We want Syndra to be kind of easy to position. So she gets to be a 4 auto attack range instead of 3. Cool. Just allows you to position her in more fun spots. It's not really a big damage buff, but now she won't suicide. And then the second buff is actually something that she should have always had. We were just trying to be a little careful, because typically a 3 cost, their spell goes from 2 star to 3 star. They get double damage. We're actually just fixing that, so that's what's happening here. And this should make it so that for maximum damage output, you actually want 3-star Syndra instead of 2 2-star Syndras. But yeah, overall, I don't think this will buff her that crazy. She was already overkilling anyway, but it should be a small buff here. So pretty comfortable with this. Okay, 4 cost. Fizz. Again, as I mentioned, the mech pilots, we had to find ways to buff them without buffing the mech. This is actually a nerf to the mech and a buff to Fizz. So if you're running Fizz with the mech actually lost some HP here. Because again, the mech uses the health of the pilots. But if you're running him outside of the mech, then he actually attacks much faster. He's supposed to be an infiltrator, so he's going to go whap, whap, whap. Stack this with the 4 infiltrator or 6 infiltrator buff. This will do a ton of damage. So, should be good there. Jinx. Jinx is interesting. Jinx will probably need some more work later too, but when we look at Rebel's underperforming a bit, and Jinx is supposed to be one of the primary carries. When you look at Blaster's actually underperforming a little. It falls off way too hard in the mid to late game. And Jinx is actually, her stats for a 4 cost are just underperforming in general because she has that prerequisite where she has to get 2 assists to turn on. So for now, we're going very light on the buff, which is just an attack speed buff. Should allow her to proc Blaster a bit more often. Should allow her to get those assists a little better. May still need more work in the future, but yeah. Soraka. Soraka has kind of underperformed for a 4 cost as well. We want this to be a champ you might be excited to take even in a Lilac Galaxy. So what we did is we gave her a bit more HP so that she's a little bit tankier. You can actually be willing to put her up in the front line a little bit if you need to. And then we also buffed her healing a little bit. 25 at 1 star, 50 at 2 star, and 18,000 at 3 star. Actually, if you look at the YouTube video of that Chinese player whose name eludes me, but I linked it a couple times, he actually put out a video literally like 3 hours ago of 3-star Soraka with tank items, and it was great. Check that out. But yeah, 3-star Soraka should actually be an exciting chase now. It's great. Wukong. Wukong has a bug fix we'll talk about later, but in addition, the health buff was good for him last patch, but we're also going to buff his damage just a bit. Now, these numbers look scary when you look at them because they look similar to Gangplank, but the thing you have to remember is this is the total damage if he were to stay on the same enemy the whole time. He doesn't. He moves around, so a lot of this is actually missing. So this buff is pretty safe. And again, if you 3-star Wukong, it should be a little more exciting. Lastly is Vel'Koz. So Vel'Koz gets a nerf in that his spell duration goes from 2.5 seconds to 2 seconds. But the reason for this nerf is because we've buffed his AI and fixed it so that he will now correctly cast more efficiently when there's only a few enemies. So he should now actually hit the enemies near the start of the spell and be better. So overall, from what we've tested, this actually feels like a buff. But give it a try. Let us know what you think. Hopefully this is no more inting squid. Now, last patch, you remember the 5-cost slide was really, really dense. This time, there's only 1. Most of the 5 costs, with the exception of GP and Aurelian Soul, are in a good spot. GP, we still would like to let sit for a bit, especially with some of the Sorcerer changes coming up. But with Aurelian Soul, what we've decided is that he is not tanky enough. Like, the whole point of Aurelian Soul is he's supposed to, ramp up over time and do damage over time. And if the fight goes longer than like 15 seconds, he's doing a lot of damage. This should allow him to do that a bit more often. This is also a Protector Aurelian Soul buff, because Protector is based on shield or health, so you could go that route. But the idea here is now Aurelian Soul should be a bit more exciting of a unit to use, provide some frontline as well. So maybe you don't just pass him up like you do now. He may still need more after this, we'll see, but this should be a good start. This is a pretty big tank buff. So, okay, moving on. Items. Chalice of Favor. This is the buff we're the most concerned about. There's a slim chance we pull this tomorrow, but right now this is what's on PvE. Chalice of Favor now gives mana to the wearer also. This means now putting a chalice on somebody means they actually benefit from it, which they didn't before. It felt kind of weird to like put items on somebody and have it not benefit them at all. Now what we've seen is this makes Syndra and Sona quite good. I've already seen a video of Sona with Seraphs and 2 chalices, basically insta-casting and giving 20 mana to her entire team constantly. So again, kind of got our eye on it, but we think this takes the item from like D tier to like A tier, so we'll see. Deathblade. This one's interesting. I'm curious how this one's going to play out. But Deathblade no longer starts with any stacks, but every stack gives 30 AD instead of 15. So if you can get it going, Deathblade's massive amounts of AD. So in a world where you're like actually running a, let's say a Jin or a Shaco, this might be better than Infinity Edge now. Frozen Heart. I think this item's insane now, but goes from 40% attack speed slow to 50% attack speed slow. This is a lot of attack speed slow. Put this on an Infiltrator, have it hop in the back line. That thing is attacking real slow. So pretty big buff to Frozen Heart here. And lastly, RFC. This is the one I'm the most excited about. RFC now gives 200% bonus range instead of 100%. This basically turns any melee champion into a range champion, and any range champion into a I hit across the map. This should be kind of exciting. I expect to see Master Yi's and Shakos running around with RFC, whapping around as range champions, so this should be fun. Hopefully this makes RFC a bit more fun to consider as an option. So we'll see how that plays out. Shroud of Stillness. Shroud of Stillness is a decent item on live that if you get from the carousel, you're like, cool, I got a Shroud, I'll use this. But you would never actually build it. So what we're doing is we're making it a little easier to use. The width gets wider, you can hit more things with it. So if you hit with Shroud, it does, pretty powerful stuff here. So pretty good. Okay, Tear of the Goddess. This is probably the most controversial change of the patch. It's going from 20 mana to 15 mana. This means if you put a Seraphs on somebody, they go from 30 mana. They go from 40 mana to 30 mana. It is now harder to get people to just insta-cast start. So, for example, a double Seraphs Vel'Koz now still has to auto-attack once before he can cast. Now, Seraphs itself still gives 20 mana. There's no change to that. But the general idea here is we don't like that the difference between somebody with 4 tiers and somebody with 0 tiers is so massive. So we're trying to squeeze that back in together. This way we can put power where we need it to on the people who don't necessarily get tiers. And that way, again, if now, let's say Vel'Koz is underpowered, for example, we can buff him and he's not so item dependent on tiers. Because right now we're not really happy with a lot of our spellcasters being so tier reliant. So, and the last item change, Zeke's Herald. Zeke's Herald got kind of a big redesign here also. So it used to be it affected 5 champions and forced you to kind of group up like that. Now it only affects 3 champions, the wearer, the person to their left, and the person to their right. But instead of 18% attack speed, it's 30% attack speed. So this means that you can give 3 key people a much larger boost of attack speed. I personally think this is really good on infiltrators. I think you can also do it on like a Xerath comp. Jin can work with it really well with it. He gets the AD, but should be more exciting. So, okay, last is the bug fixes and other changes. And yes, I'm blocking some of the text. I will read through it. And as always, we do want to go through these because some of these may affect the meta. The first one, shields in overtime are now 66% reduced effectiveness. This means no more Karmas soloing 1v9 in overtime. This is something that has been kind of a long-term problem. So we've now fixed this. So should be good there. No more cheating overtime with shields. The next one is just a really funny one. Cybernetic 3 is now a bronze level trait instead of a silver level trait. Easy cheesy. Mordekaiser's tooltip now properly states that shield lasts 8 seconds. Cool. Fixed a bug where Wukong was not affecting enemies for the first 0.25 seconds of his spell. So that's a small Wukong buff, because he'll get fixed there. Fixed issues around the taunt voice line champions say when they win a combat. Now only victorious and alive champion taunts will be heard. Cool. Adding additional Death Blades to a unit during combat will no longer reset all your Death Blades counters. Cool. Fixed a bug where selling a Mech Pilot while the trait was active would give you 0 gold. I'm sure a bunch of you have experienced that bug. Thankfully, that is fixed. You will now be able to get your gold. Fixed a bug where the super mech wasn't benefiting from infiltrator or demolitionist trait bonuses when on an away board. So this is kind of a buff to mech, which is a little scary that it was such an oppressive comp while half the time not benefiting from its traits. So that's a little scary. But we are shipping with a known issue, and we wanted to be upfront about this. The super mech does not benefit from team-wide trait bonuses like Mystic or Chrono when on an away board. So be aware of that when you're building your comps. We will try to fix this for 10.9, but we wanted to be upfront that we are aware of that bug. Lastly, we fixed a bug where summoned units, this is things pulled in by Thresh and Xerath Portal, were counting as player damage. So no more using Thresh to cheat a bunch of player damage. And Kane now spawns 2 rows closer so mobile players can see what items he has. So, cool. All right. That's going to do it for the patch 10.8 rundown. This goes live on April 15th. You can enjoy that. Again, subject to change, but we'll see how that goes. Hopefully this makes the meta... I think the player damage changes alone will change the meta pretty significantly, but we'll see how it goes. As always, give us your feedback. Otherwise, that's going to do it. Thanks, everybody.